Why did the quiet woman by the flagpole never speak during the morning drills? Every recruit at Fort Garrison noticed her eventually, that still figure in faded fatigues, hands clasped behind her back, watching without expression. Some thought she was a widow, maybe a base guest who'd lost someone. Others whispered she was a counselor or a retired officer's wife. But no one really knew. Until the day a rifle was aimed at her head. The sun that afternoon was merciless, the kind that burns the edges of everything and leaves tempers short. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, and the air smelled of sweat, dust, and gun oil. Training had ended early, and the recruits were still loud with adrenaline, laughter bouncing between the concrete walls. That's when the shouting started. Private Cole, 18, restless. The kind of kid who still thought rank was measured in volume. His voice cut through the noise like a snapped wire. "Move aside, ma'am," he barked, the words cracked by bravado. He stood too close, his boots scuffing the dirt, his M4 slung loose but ready. Evelyn Grant didn't move. She just looked at him, eyes level, steady. The calm kind that doesn't need to prove anything. "Lower your weapon," she said softly. Her tone wasn't loud, but every recruit within earshot froze. The sound of the rifle's safety clicking off rang like a warning bell. Cole's grin widened, a flash of arrogance masking the tremor in his fingers. "What are you gonna do, Grandma? Knit me a sweater?" The sergeants nearby turned their heads, not sure whether to intervene or watch whatever this was becoming. Then everything happened at once. A blur of movement, a sharp twist, a thud against the dirt. When the dust cleared, Cole was face down on the ground, his wrist pinned beneath a boot, the rifle nowhere near him. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to stop. The woman standing above him didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. "Do you have any idea," a voice finally broke the silence, "who you just aimed that rifle at?" Sergeant Miller stepped forward, disbelief in his tone. Cole didn't answer. He couldn't. Evelyn Grant released the pressure on his wrist but didn't step away. Her eyes stayed on him, calm, measured, but full of something heavier than fury. "A rifle isn't power," she said quietly. "It's responsibility. You pointed it at someone. You'd better understand what that means." Cole's chest rose and fell with fast, shallow breaths. The crowd that had gathered stayed dead silent. Then she turned and walked away, leaving her boot print on the dirt beside him. Yeah. Later that day, the base buzzed with whispers. Who was she? What unit was she from? How did she move like that? By dinner, rumors were flying: Navy, CIA, Black Ops. But the truth, the real story, was quieter and far more complicated. Evelyn Grant wasn't just a name from an old roster. She was the kind of soldier who never sought recognition, the kind who vanished between wars and left only silence behind. To tour in Afghanistan, Special Forces, Operative Callsign Falcon 6. There were no medals on display, no framed commendations, only the quiet scars that don't heal on the surface. Yeah. That night, under the hum of the base lights, Sergeant Miller sat across from Cole in the mess hall. The kid's hands still trembled when he lifted his cup. "You don't get it, do you?" Miller said, voice low. "You got lucky she didn't break your arm. That woman's the reason half of us made it back home." Cole looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" Miller exhaled, leaning back. "Afghanistan, Kandahar Province, 2009. Her team walked into an ambush, outnumbered, cut off for 3 days. She carried a wounded man 6 miles through enemy fire." He paused, eyes narrowing at the memory. "Never said a word about it after, never took credit. That's Evelyn Grant." Cole's throat tightened. He thought she was just some retired officer's wife. "She doesn't wear her rank anymore," Miller continued. "But make no mistake, she earned every inch of that ground she walks on." Yeah. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat alone in her quarters, a small, undecorated room at the far end of the barracks. On the nightstand was a faded photo. 5 soldiers, smiling in desert dust, arms around each other. 3 of them were gone now. Her hand brushed the edge of the frame. A knock echoed at the door. It was soft, hesitant. "Come in," she said. Private Cole stepped inside, his uniform slightly wrinkled, eyes uncertain. "I just wanted to apologize, ma'am." His voice cracked. "I didn't know who you were. I shouldn't have." She raised a hand, stopping him. "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It's about who you choose to be when no one's watching." He lowered his gaze, shame flickering across his face. "I don't deserve to be here," he murmured. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, then reached into her pocket. In her palm rested a small silver pin, worn smooth by years of combat gear. She held it out. "None of us do," she said. "That's why we fight to be worthy." Cole stared at the pin, the reflection of the desk lamp glinting off its edge. "What is it?" he asked. She smiled faintly, a reminder that mercy isn't weakness, it's a test. Yeah. After he left, Evelyn sat in silence. Outside, the hum of bass generators filled the night. She leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed, but her mind wasn't in that room anymore. It was back there, in the dust and heat of a faraway valley. A convoy, a radio gone dead, a decision that still haunted her. The scream of an explosion, the smell of burned sand, the weight of a body in her arms. "Falcon 6, do you copy? Evelyn, come in." Her own voice echoed in the memory, younger, steadier, filled with the certainty of command. But that certainty had died somewhere between the second and third tour. The night she stopped believing in orders. The night she learned that mercy could save a life or cost one. She opened her eyes, the past dissolving in the dim lamplight. Some memories never leave, they just change shape. And tomorrow, she knew, the recruits would stare again. The quiet woman by the flagpole, the one who didn't fit the picture of a soldier. But she didn't need them to understand. She'd already lived the consequences of pride and the redemption that follows silence. Yeah. Morning came with sharp bugle calls and the smell of gunpowder from the range. Cole was up before dawn, pin polished and fastened inside his jacket pocket. When he saw her again, standing where she always did, the same calm presence, he hesitated, then saluted. She didn't return it, she just nodded once. That was enough. Because some lessons don't need to be spoken. Yeah. But behind Evelyn's calm, something was stirring. A letter had arrived the night before, sealed with an insignia she hadn't seen in years. A Special Forces emblem. Her old unit. She hadn't told anyone, not yet. But the words burned in her mind. Request for consultation, Operation Iron Dusk. The past wasn't done with her. Not by a long shot. Why did she keep the letter sealed for 3 days before opening it? No one on base knew she'd received it. Not Sergeant Miller, not even the base commander. She carried it folded inside her jacket, close to her heart, the paper already softening along the creases. It wasn't fear that stopped her from breaking the seal. It was memory. Some letters are written in ink, others are written in ghosts. The envelope bore the emblem of her old unit, the falcon etched above a blade. She hadn't seen that insignia since she'd left the Special Forces 6 years ago. The last time she did, it was stamped on a report she never wanted to read again. Operation Mornlight, mission compromised. She sat alone that night by the barracks window. The base was quiet, a stillness that always came after lights out. In the distance, floodlights cast pale halos on the yard where the recruits had trained earlier that day. She could still hear their laughter in her head, still see Cole's nervous salute. Finally, she opened the letter. Major Evelyn Grant, request for limited field consultation. Operation Iron Dusk. Classified details enclosed. Command authorization. Call Armitage. Her breath caught at that name. Colonel Armitage. He'd been her commanding officer once. The man who had sent her unit into that Afghan valley and never came to retrieve them. Her hand tightened around the paper until it creased. Below the formal lines, a single handwritten note was scrawled in black ink. "We found him, Evelyn. We found Mercer." She froze. Captain Luke Mercer, her teammate, her closest friend, the man who vanished during the ambush that ended her career. They'd all believed he was dead. The next morning, she stood in front of the flagpole again, the paper folded neatly in her pocket. Private Cole jogged past during PT, giving her a respectful nod. She returned it this time, almost absently. Her mind was somewhere else. She promised herself she was done with missions, done with the past. But there it was calling her back, dressed in ink and old wounds. Miller approached, coffee mug in hand. "You're up early," he said, squinting against the rising sun. "Couldn't sleep." He studied her for a moment. "That kind of tired doesn't come from lack of sleep." She smiled faintly. "You always were too observant." He shrugged. "You taught me to be." A pause. The wind tugged at the edges of her jacket. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Every day I try not to." That afternoon she sat in Colonel Reeves' office, the current base commander, young, efficient, too clean around the edges. His eyes flicked between the file on his desk and the woman standing before him. "You've been requested for consultation, Major Grant." "Former Major," she corrected softly. He ignored it. "Apparently, your experience in covert field recovery is relevant to Operation Iron Dusk. Classified theater, but the authorization came from higher up than me." Her jaw tightened. "Colonel Armitage." He nodded. "That's the one, you know him." "I did." He leaned forward. "They need you at Bagram in 72 hours. Transport leaves tomorrow night." Her heart sank. "Afghanistan again." "Permission to refuse?" she asked. Reeves looked up, surprised. "You can't refuse a special operations request. Not this kind. It's advisory, but it's not really optional." She exhaled slowly. "Understood." As she turned to leave, he added, "They must think pretty highly of you." Her hand lingered on the doorframe. "No," she said quietly. "They just know I still have unfinished business." That night she packed in silence. Her movements were mechanical, folding fatigues, checking the holster, polishing the worn pin she'd given Cole a replica of. Each motion carried a memory, each silence a voice she could almost hear. "Falcon 6, you're clear to move." "Copy that, keep the line open." Static, then the explosion. Then silence. She blinked, shaking the sound from her mind. PTSD had its own clock. It didn't follow time, it followed triggers. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Still alive, huh? Heard you're coming back. Could use someone who actually knows what she's doing." No name, but she knew the voice behind the words. Captain Mason Hale, the last surviving member of her original squad. He'd stayed in, she hadn't. The plane to Kabul roared through the night. She sat by the window, staring into the black void below. Across the aisle, soldiers whispered, laughing, trying to hide the edge of nervous energy that comes before deployment. Evelyn didn't speak. She traced her finger along the scar on her wrist, a faint line that ran just below the pulse. It was the last gift from the ambush 6 years ago. As the engines droned, her mind drifted. Back to the valley, the smell of sand and diesel, the ringing in her ears after the mortar hit. And Mercer, pinned under debris, calling for backup. She dragged him as far as she could. Then the enemy fire came. She'd been forced to fall back, promising she'd return. But when she did, he was gone. All that was left was his tag. She never forgave herself. Bagram Airfield was colder than she remembered. When she stepped off the transport, a thin mist hung over the tarmac. The base had changed, new walls, new faces, but the air still smelled of kerosene and memories. Mason Hale was waiting near a convoy truck, his beard grayer, his stance still sharp. "Didn't think I'd see the day," he said, smirking. Evelyn dropped her duffel at his feet. "Neither did I." He studied her for a moment. "You read the briefing?" "Not yet." He handed her a tablet. "Iron Dusk, extraction mission, Deep Valley, Western Sector. We've got credible intel Mercer might have been captured, not killed. Been moved between insurgent cells for years." Her pulse quickened. "You're telling me he's alive?" "Intel says maybe, but you know how that goes." She nodded, scanning the map. The red zone highlighted near the Toragar Range. "The same valley," she whispered. Mason's expression darkened. "Yeah, the same one." Yeah. Later in the operations tent, Colonel Armitage appeared on the screen, his face aged but eyes still cold. "Grant," he said, "good to see you back in the field." She didn't return the sentiment. "I didn't come back for you, Colonel." He smirked faintly. "Still the same attitude. We have credible leads. Mercer was taken by an offshoot group that's resurfaced. We need your insight. You knew his roots, his habits, his fallback positions." She folded her arms. "You sent us there without backup. 3 people died because of your intel." His tone hardened. "We don't have time for blame. We have an asset possibly alive. Can you do the job or not?" For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then she said, "I'll do it, but not for you." Yeah. That night she sat outside the tent, watching the stars, the same constellations she used to mark navigation routes years ago. She thought she'd left the war behind, but it had only been waiting. Mason joined her, handing over a metal cup of coffee. "You shouldn't have come back," he said softly. "I didn't have a choice." He took a sip. "You always had a choice. You just hated leaving anything unfinished." She smiled faintly. "You still read people too well." He shrugged. "Old habit." After a pause, he said, "If we find Mercer, what then?" She looked at him, the question sinking into the quiet between them. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe forgiveness. Maybe a ghost that finally stops following me." Yeah. At dawn, the hum of engines filled the air. The team assembled near the helipad, 5 operators, loaded and silent. Evelyn moved among them, checking gear like she'd never left. Her hands knew the motions by memory. Mason caught her glance. "You sure you're ready for this?" She nodded. "Doesn't matter if I am." As the rotors began to spin, she took a long breath, the desert wind sweeping across her face. The past wasn't buried. It was just waiting to be revisited. The helicopter lifted off, blades slicing through the golden light. She didn't look back at the base. Because once you decide to face the ghosts you ran from, the only direction left is forward. Why did her hands stop shaking the moment the helicopter crossed into the valley? Because fear had no power here anymore. Only memory did. The sound of the rotors thundered against the cliffs as the chopper weaved through a narrow gorge carved by centuries of wind and war. Evelyn sat by the door, headset pressed tight, eyes fixed on the jagged terrain below. The mountains of southern Afghanistan stretched endlessly, old, scarred, and silent witnesses to too many lost soldiers. The operator beside her muttered over comms, 30 minutes to drop zone. Mason's voice crackled through the line, "Falcon 6, you good?" She didn't answer right away. The call sign hit her like a pulse of electricity, Falcon 6. The name she hadn't heard spoken in years. The name she buried the day she walked away. "Copy," she finally replied, steady. Below, the valley opened like a wound. Dry riverbeds cut through the sand, winding toward the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, if the intel was right, Luke Mercer had been held, or maybe still was. The thought was impossible to silence. She reached into her vest pocket and brushed the small silver pin, the one she, once given Cole's replica of. Her fingers tightened around it as if grounding herself to something still human. 5 minutes, Mason called. Evelyn pulled down her goggles, clipped her rifle strap, and checked her sidearm. The wind grew harsher as they descended. Her stomach clenched, not from fear of combat, but from the ghosts waiting below. Because this was the same place it had all gone wrong. The team moved fast after touchdown, 6 shadows against the dying light. The air smelled of gunpowder and dry sage, the kind of air that felt older than war itself. "Check perimeter," Mason ordered. "Thermals active." Evelyn scanned the terrain. The same ridges, the same skeletal trees. She could still trace every stone, every ditch from memory. It was as if the valley hadn't aged, only she had. They advanced toward the coordinates where the intel marked possible activity. The closer they got, the quieter it became, too quiet. A few meters ahead, Corporal Diaz raised a fist, halting the line. "Movement," he whispered. Everyone froze. Through her scope, Evelyn saw something, a flicker of light, then nothing. She exhaled slowly. Reflection, probably glass. They crept closer, rifles ready, until they reached a half-buried outpost. Rusted metal walls, old tarps fluttering in the wind. It wasn't recent. It was a graveyard. Inside, dust coated everything. Scattered bullet casings, a few empty ration packs, and near the far wall a makeshift bunk. Mason crouched, lifting a torn piece of cloth. The insignia stitched on it was faded but still visible. Evelyn's heart stopped. It was Mercer's old unit patch. She knelt beside it, fingers trembling slightly. The scent of sand and decay clung to the fabric. "He was here," she whispered. Mason nodded grimly. "Maybe not long ago." They found the first clue an hour later, buried beneath loose dirt outside the outpost. A small, encrypted data drive sealed in a plastic casing. Evelyn slid it into her portable decryptor. The screen flickered to life, showing a series of log entries, each dated across 6 years. The first was video, grainy, low light. Mercer's face appeared, thinner, older, but alive. "This is Captain Luke Mercer, Task Unit Falcon," he said, voice hoarse. "If anyone finds this, I'm still operational, captured during recon in Kandahar sector. They're using us, experimenting, trying to turn us against each other." The recording cut to static. Then another clip loaded. "Evelyn," Mercer whispered in the next entry. "If you're alive, don't come back here, not for me. They're not insurgents, not anymore." The screen glitched again, his eyes wild, his tone desperate. "They're building something, using our data, DNA. They're not who we thought." Then silence. The file ended. Evelyn's hands clenched around the device. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "What the hell was that?" Mason asked. "I don't know," she whispered, "but that was Luke I remember." Night fell fast in the valley. The team set up a temporary bivouac near the ridge, posting sentries and checking their surroundings. The wind howled through the broken canyons like a warning. Evelyn sat alone near the campfire, the glow reflecting in her tired eyes. The flames reminded her of another night long ago, when she and Mercer had waited out an ambush, whispering over comms, trying to keep each other awake. He used to joke about retirement, about opening a small mechanics shop somewhere quiet, away from the noise. And now he was somewhere between the living and the lost. Mason approached, crouching beside her. "You saw what I saw," he said quietly. She nodded. "Doesn't look like any prisoner log I've ever seen." "No," she murmured. "That was fear, but not from capture, from knowing something he couldn't stop." He tossed a stone into the fire. "So what's our move?" She looked toward the horizon. "We find out what happened to him, all of it." They set out before dawn. Moving along the dry riverbed, the landscape felt haunted, as if the earth itself remembered what it had seen. Halfway through the route, Diaz picked up a heat signature. The team froze. Evelyn dropped to one knee, scanning the scope. A small structure stood half-hidden under a slope, metallic, wrong for the environment. Not an insurgent camp. More like a research post. They approached cautiously. No guards, no movement. Inside, the air was stale and metallic. Crates lined the walls, each marked with English codes, not Arabic. Evelyn brushed the dust from a label. Property of Strategic Response Division, SRD 87. Her pulse jumped. That wasn't an insurgent faction. That was U.S. government. What the hell is this doing here? Mason muttered. They powered a terminal using the portable generator. Files loaded slowly, fragmented. Video feeds, medical logs. And there, among the data, a photo. Luke Mercer, eyes open, hooked to machines, monitored by personnel in American uniforms. He wasn't captured. He was kept. Evelyn's voice cracked. They lied to us. Mason clenched his fists. They used us. Yeah. Suddenly, static cut through the comms. A distorted voice filtered through. Team 2, respond. You're off route. This area is restricted. Return to coordinates immediately. Reeves. Evelyn grabbed the mic. Command, this is Falcon 6. We've found evidence SRD was conducting unsanctioned research on captured personnel. We need clarification. Static, then. That's classified. Leave it. Extraction in 1 hour. Her chest burned. You knew. Falcon 6, that's an order. The line went dead. Yeah. Outside, the wind had risen, carrying sand in furious waves. The team gathered their gear, tense, angry. So that's it, Diaz said bitterly. We walk away. Evelyn looked at the terminal again. Mercer's image stared back at her, half-man, half-memory. No, she said quietly. We finish what we started. Mason frowned. Evelyn. She turned to him, eyes fierce. They made us ghosts. They buried the truth and called it classified. But if Mercer's alive, I owe him the truth, not obedience. For a long moment, Mason said nothing. Then he nodded once. I'm with you. Yeah. They left the structure before dawn, heading deeper into the canyon, guided by coordinates found in the last decrypted file. The route led them toward an abandoned mine. The ground trembled faintly beneath their boots. Somewhere deep underground, machinery hummed. Evelyn raised her hand. Hold. Through the darkness, a faint red glow seeped from the mine's entrance. She tightened her grip on her rifle. Her pulse steadied. Whatever waited inside, answers or ghosts, she would face it. For Mercer, for herself, for every lie carved into their silence. Why did the ground seem to hum beneath their boots? The team stood before the entrance to the abandoned mine, though it was clear now it wasn't abandoned at all. A faint vibration pulsed through the sand, subtle but constant, like a buried heartbeat. From inside, the low hum of machinery blended with the sound of the desert wind. Evelyn adjusted her NVGs, scanning the dark tunnel ahead. Rusted steel beams framed the entrance. The red glow from deeper within flickered like a warning. Thermals, Mason asked. Diaz checked his wrist display. Negative for surface movement, but heat building underground. Evelyn's voice came calm, quiet. Then something's alive down there. She led the way, her rifle raised. The others followed, 6 shadows swallowed by darkness. The air grew colder the deeper they moved. The walls shifted from stone to reinforced concrete. Old cables ran along the ceiling, humming faintly with power. This isn't an insurgent hideout, Mason muttered. No, Evelyn said, it's a facility. Yeah. After 100 meters, the tunnel widened into a chamber lined with glass panels and terminals, still powered, still running. The smell of metal and chemicals hung thick in the air. Diaz knelt by one of the consoles, brushing dust away. Data servers, old encryption but American firmware. Evelyn stared at the glowing monitors. Dozens of status logs blinked, each marked with project codes. SRD 87/Neural Resilience Trial/Subject M04. Her stomach dropped. Subject M04. She typed the code into a terminal. The monitor flickered, loading a file. The image that appeared froze the air in her lungs. Luke Mercer. He was sitting in a medical chair, strapped in, his eyes open but distant. A line of sensors mapped across his temples. The timestamp, 5 years ago. Audio playback began automatically. Test subject demonstrates elevated neural stability following exposure to controlled trauma loops. Memory regression improving. Subject remains docile. Then another voice, faint, older, one she recognized instantly. Colonel Armitage. Proceed with Phase 4. Let's see if he can distinguish command suggestion from conscience. The clip ended. Mason swore under his breath. They were conditioning him, using trauma as control. Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. They turned him into a weapon. A loud clang echoed from deeper inside the mine. Everyone turned, weapons raised. Movement, Diaz hissed. The sound repeated, metallic, deliberate, footsteps. Then from the shadows, a figure stepped into view. Tall, thin, a man in tattered fatigues, beard untrimmed, eyes reflecting the red glow. Evelyn froze. Luke. He stopped a few meters away, blinking as if waking from a dream. Evie. Her rifle lowered slightly, disbelief fighting through the years. "It's me," she whispered. "It's Evelyn." For a moment he didn't move. Then, slow as a ghost, he smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You came back," he said softly. "They said you would." She stepped closer. "Who said?" But before he could answer, Mason grabbed her shoulder. "Evelyn, look." From behind Mercer, a red light blinked on his neck, a micro-implant. His expression twitched, pain flashing across his face. "They're listening," he gasped. "You shouldn't be here." Then the hum beneath the ground intensified, growing into a roar. The mine came alive. Hidden lights flickered on across the ceiling. Doors hissed open. Mechanical whirs echoed from the walls. "Contacts," Diaz shouted. Armed drones emerged from side corridors, small, fast, metallic shadows that moved like predators. The team dove for cover as gunfire erupted, sparks lighting the chamber. Evelyn returned fire, precision tight. 2 drones dropped, but more poured in. The air filled with dust and heat. Mercer shouted over the chaos. "They're controlling me." He gripped his head, the implant flashing brighter. "I can't." Evelyn turned to him, desperate. "Fight it, Luke." He looked at her, pain, confusion, and something darker in his eyes. Then he reached for his weapon. "Luke, no." He hesitated, trembling. "It's not me." The implant pulsed red again, and he fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder as Mason tackled her behind a steel beam. "Evelyn, we gotta move," Mason yelled. But she couldn't take her eyes off Luke. The man she'd come to save was now her enemy, not by choice, but by design. The team fell back toward the exit, covering each other in bursts. Evelyn moved last, firing short, controlled shots, her shoulder burning. "Diaz suppressive," Mason shouted. "On it." Grenades detonated, shaking the tunnel. Dust filled the air. When they reached the outer shaft, the drone stopped pursuit, almost as if on command. The hum faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Evelyn collapsed against the rock wall, clutching her wound. "Are you hit bad?" Mason asked. "It's fine," she said through gritted teeth. "It's not the first time." Diaz cursed softly. "That wasn't an ambush. That was a trigger. They activated him." Evelyn's breathing slowed, steadying. "Armitage knew we'd find this place. He wanted us to." "Why?" Mason asked. She met his gaze. "To clean up the evidence." They set up a temporary shelter behind a ridge, patching wounds and checking comms. The encrypted channel remained dead jammed. Mason paced. We're off-grid, low ammo and commands not answering. What's the play? Evelyn stared into the sandstorm building on the horizon. We get Mercer out. Whatever's been done to him, we end it. Mason hesitated. And if he's too far gone? Her jaw tightened. Then we give him peace. Yeah. That night Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her shoulder throbbed, but it wasn't the pain keeping her awake, it was guilt. Every part of her training told her to follow the mission, to finish the objective. But this wasn't about orders anymore. This was personal. She remembered the last words Mercer said before disappearing years ago. You're not the one who gets left behind, Evie. Now he was. And she'd walked right back into the same hell to bring him home. She rose quietly, stepping away from the camp. The desert stretched endless under the moonlight. She pulled the folded letter from her pocket, the one that started all this. Her voice trembled as she whispered to the wind, You sent me back here, Armitage. You knew what I'd find. The desert didn't answer. But in her chest, something hardened. She wasn't here to survive anymore. She was here to expose the truth. Yeah. At dawn, Mason found her loading gear into her pack. Going somewhere. She looked up, back into the mine. You're insane. I've been called worse. He stepped closer. Evelyn, if what you think is true, if Armitage did this, then the deeper you go, the more they'll erase you. You won't make it back. She slung the rifle across her shoulder. Then someone else will know the story. He sighed, knowing there was no stopping her. You really think you can save him? She met his eyes. No, but I can make sure he's not forgotten. Yeah. They returned underground with dawn's first light. The air was colder, the hum fainter, as if the place itself knew they were coming. They reached the main chamber again. Mercer was gone. Only his restraints remained, broken, bloodied. A new file blinked on one of the terminals. She opened it. A video feed. Armitage. Major Grant, if you're seeing this, I assume you've disobeyed orders again. His voice was calm, almost smug. You should have stayed retired. You were always too loyal to the wrong people. Her fists clenched. Operation Iron Dusk wasn't about recovery. It was about control, neural conditioning, the perfect soldier. No hesitation, no mercy. Mercer was the prototype. And you, he paused, you were the data model. The screen cut to black. Evelyn's pulse froze. They used me. Mason stepped forward, stunned. You were part of the research. Her voice broke. I thought it was a psychological resilience study. They said it was for veterans struggling with trauma. I didn't know they used it to build this. She felt sick. Everything she believed in, every mission, every sacrifice had been twisted into something monstrous. And Mercer had paid the price. Yeah. Outside, the storm began to rage, wind howling through the canyon. Evelyn stared at the terminal, jaw set, eyes burning with purpose. They took our pain and turned it into a weapon, she whispered. Now we turn it back on them. Mason nodded, then let's finish it. They gathered explosives from their packs, planting charges along the power grid and the structural beams. As Evelyn placed the last charge near the control panel, she paused, her reflection faint in the glass. For a moment she saw Mercer's face there, calm, forgiving. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she pressed the detonator. The mine collapsed behind them in a thunderous roar, dust and light consuming the valley. The sound rolled like distant thunder, the echo of a truth buried and burned. Evelyn stood watching the smoke rise, her face unreadable. Mason approached slowly. Think that's the end of it? She didn't answer right away. Her hand brushed the scar on her wrist, the one Mercer once patched up for her years ago. No, she said finally, that was just the beginning. Why was the air on the return flight heavier than the smoke that followed them? because sometimes silence weighs more than debris. The helicopter cut through the dawn like a blade, carrying Evelyn, Mason, and what was left of the truth. Dust and ash trailed behind them, the valley below still smoldering from the detonations. The mine, the servers, the evidence, all reduced to ruin. Mason sat opposite her, staring out the open door. His face was streaked with grime, eyes distant. Neither of them had spoken since they took off. Evelyn's shoulder throbbed where Mercer's bullet had grazed her. The bandage was soaked through, but she didn't care. Her thoughts were elsewhere, replaying Armitage's words over and over. "You were the data model." The phrase echoed like a curse. All those years she'd believed she was helping veterans recover, filling out reports, sharing her combat experiences, working with psychologists on resilience conditioning. She believed she was healing something broken in herself. She hadn't realized she'd been helping them design the perfect way to break someone else. Mason finally spoke. "You okay?" She looked at him, eyes hollow but sharp. "You ever feel like your whole career was built on a lie?" He gave a bitter chuckle. "Every soldier feels that once, most just don't find proof." The pilot's voice broke over comms. "We're approaching Bagram. Command's ordered debrief immediately on arrival." Mason shot her a look. "You think they know what we did?" Evelyn exhaled. "They always know." Yeah. The landing pad was crawling with personnel. Military police, medical officers, command staff, too many eyes. As soon as the rotor slowed, armed MPs surrounded the chopper. Evelyn's gut tightened. "Major Grant," a voice barked, "you and Captain Hale are to surrender your weapons." Mason stiffened. "On whose authority?" The officer stepped forward, holding up a sealed document. "Colonel Armitage, you're under investigation for unauthorized destruction of government property and treason under Special Operations Code 47. The words hit like a slap. Evelyn didn't move. She met the officer's gaze, calm as ever. "And Mercer, what did he get? A medal for being your lab rat." The officer's expression didn't change. "Weapons, now." Mason started to argue, but she raised a hand. "Do it." They handed over their rifles. Cold metal cuffs clicked around their wrists. As they were escorted away, Mason muttered under his breath, "This is how they clean up their messes." Evelyn's voice was low. "Then let's make sure they choke on it." Yeah. They were separated the moment they entered the interrogation block. Evelyn was led into a small room. Bare walls, a metal chair, and a single camera blinking red in the corner. The door shut with a heavy clang. Minutes passed. Then the door opened again and Colonel Reeves stepped in. He looked uncomfortable, eyes darting anywhere but hers. "Major." "Don't," she said quietly. "You knew what iron dusk was." He paused, not the full extent. "That's not an answer." He sighed. "Look, command's got orders. I have to record this. You detonated an active research facility. You compromised classified operations." Evelyn leaned forward. "Classified operations where our own soldiers were tortured in the name of control. You saw the files, Reeves. You saw Mercer." His jaw tightened. "You think I didn't lose people too? You think you're the only one who's angry?" She met his eyes. "No, but I'm the only one still willing to say it out loud." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You should have stayed retired." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I tried." Yeah. Hours passed. Questions, denials, silence. By evening, Reeves returned with 2 MPs. "You're being transferred to a secure location, stateside." She stood, cuffed again. "Am I being charged?" He didn't answer. Mason was waiting in the corridor, restrained, bruised, but unbroken. "Where to?" he asked. "Classified," one MP said. They were escorted onto a transport plane. No insignias, no flight logs, only shadows and cold air. Evelyn sat beside Mason in silence as the engines roared to life. Funny, he muttered. We destroy one illegal project and they vanish us for it. She looked straight ahead. Means we hit the nerve. Yeah. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the plane made an unexpected stop, mid-air refueling, they were told. But when the hatch opened, a man stepped aboard. Colonel Armitage. He looked older up close, hair thinner, skin weathered, but his eyes were still that same calculating blue. Grant, he said, voice smooth. I expected better judgment. Evelyn glared. You expected obedience. He smiled faintly. You've always misunderstood the balance between loyalty and trust. You experimented on our own soldiers. Tested resilience, he corrected. The line between breaking and rebuilding is thinner than you think. You crossed it. He leaned closer, his tone almost sympathetic. Do you really believe the world wants soldiers who feel? The public needs heroes. The government needs control. I simply gave them both. She didn't blink. You gave them monsters. He straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. You should have stayed out of this. Now you'll disappear quietly. History forgets the inconvenient. Mason spoke up from across the aisle. Funny thing about history, it likes to repeat itself. You really think no one will dig up what you buried? Armitage gave a small, almost pitying smile. No one will find the evidence. You saw to that yourself. Evelyn's jaw clenched. Maybe I destroyed the files, Colonel, but I didn't destroy the truth. He paused, studying her, maybe trying to read the meaning beneath her words. Then, with a smirk, he turned toward the hatch. Goodbye, Major. The door closed behind him. Yeah. Hours later, the plane landed at an undisclosed base. The MPs led them through sterile corridors lit by fluorescent strips. Everything smelled of disinfectant and secrecy. They were locked in adjacent cells. Evelyn sat on the cold cot, staring at the wall. Mason's voice drifted through the vent between their cells. You still got that pin. She reached into her pocket. The small silver pin was still there, hidden from the searches. Yeah, she said softly. Good, Mason replied. Means they don't have everything. Yeah. Days blurred together. No clocks, no sunlight, only interrogations, routine checks, silence. But Evelyn was patient. Soldiers learn patience better than anyone. On the sixth night, the silence broke. Footsteps, a key turning. The door creaked open. It wasn't a guard. It was Sergeant Miller. He looked rough, travel-worn, his uniform unmarked. You didn't think I'd let them bury you, did you? Evelyn blinked, stunned. How? Cole, he interrupted. The kid from Garrison. He saw your name in the reports. He started asking questions, got reassigned to communications, found the flight logs, brought them to me. She almost smiled. He shouldn't have done that. Miller grinned. Guess he learned something from you. He handed her a small device, a data chip. Everything they erased. I pulled it before your detonations hit the mainframe. She stared at it. You kept a copy. Let's just say I don't trust easy. Her throat tightened. Thank you. He nodded. We've got one shot to get you out. Extraction window closes in 10 minutes. Mason's cell door opened next. You always were terrible at retiring, he said, half smiling. Evelyn stood. Let's finish this. Yeah. They slipped through service corridors, following Miller through the labyrinth of the facility. The alarms hadn't sounded, not yet. At the hangar bay, a transport plane idled, engines humming. Cole at the controls, Miller said. Kid's got guts. Evelyn hesitated, glancing back toward the hallway. Miller, she said quietly, if I don't make it. He cut her off. You will. She smiled faintly. That's what Mercer used to say. Then the sirens wailed. Go, Miller shouted. They sprinted for the ramp. Bullets cracked through the hangar as security forces poured in. Mason returned fire, covering their escape. Evelyn grabbed Miller's arm and hauled him aboard as the ramp lifted. Cole's voice came over comms. Hang on. The plane lurched forward, racing down the runway. Spotlights streaked past. A burst of gunfire hit the tail, but the engines roared louder. Then lift. The ground dropped away beneath them. Freedom for now. Yeah. At 20,000 feet, the tension broke. Mason leaned back, exhaling. You always know how to pick your missions. Evelyn managed a tired smile. This wasn't a mission. This was redemption. Cole turned from the cockpit, eyes wide. Ma'am, where do we go now? She looked out the window, the horizon painted in pale blue and gold. To the only place the truth still matters, she said. To the people. Miller frowned. You're planning to leak it. She nodded. Every file, every name, every lie. If we die for it, so be it. But someone needs to know what was done in the dark. He gave a slow, solemn nod. Then let's make it count. Yeah. Evelyn took the chip from her pocket, holding it up to the light. Tiny, fragile, but inside everything they tried to erase. Mercer's recordings, the experiment logs, the proof. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. You didn't die for nothing, Luke. Mason glanced at her. You think the truth changes anything? She looked out into the clouds. Maybe not, but it'll remind them that conscience still has a voice. Why did the world go so quiet once the truth finally had a heartbeat? Because every lie waits for silence before it screams. The stolen transport cut across the dark Atlantic, engines grinding against heavy winds. Inside, the air was thick with exhaustion. No uniforms, no ranks, only fugitives bound by a single choice that could cost them everything. Evelyn sat near the open ramp, watching the clouds slide by beneath them like ash on water. Mason paced, restless, checking weapons he knew they might never use. Cole sat in the cockpit, his hands shaking slightly on the controls, too young to be flying toward treason. Miller came to her side, lowering his voice. You realize there's no going back now. She nodded. There wasn't the moment we lit that fuse in the valley. He hesitated, then said, I pulled comm frequencies off the chip before we left. Civilian news feeds, whistleblower networks. If we want this story seen, we need to send it where the military can't intercept. Evelyn looked at him. And if they trace it? Then we make sure they have to kill the signal, not us. Yeah. They landed hours later on a cold airstrip in northern Iceland. A forgotten NATO refuel point turned semi-civilian. No questions asked, as long as cash spoke louder than clearance codes. Snow whipped across the tarmac as they unloaded. The world outside was white and empty, the kind of place where you could disappear if you wanted to. Cole's teeth chattered. Feels like the end of the world. Evelyn adjusted her jacket. It might be the start of one. They took shelter in an abandoned maintenance hangar. Mason lit a small heater while Miller connected the encrypted laptop to a stolen satellite uplink. Evelyn placed the data chip on the table. For a moment, no one moved. The soft glow of the laptop screen cast their faces in cold blue light. Once this goes out, Mason said, there's no turning it off. Evelyn nodded. Then it's time. She slid the chip in. The screen flickered. Mercer's files, Armitage's voice, the experiments, the logs, all there. Proof of everything. Miller began the upload. I'm routing through 20 mirrors worldwide. They'll have to burn half the internet to stop it. Cole leaned closer, eyes wide. People are gonna see this, right? They'll know what was done. Evelyn gave a faint smile. They'll know. What they believe, that's another story. Yeah. Hours passed as the upload crawled across the frozen night. They took turns resting, though none of them really slept. Around midnight, Mason approached Evelyn. You ever think about what comes after, assuming we make it through this? She looked at him. You planning a future now? He smirked. Just curious if you've still got one left in you. She didn't answer at first. If this gets out, I don't expect to walk free again. But maybe that's not what freedom means anymore. He studied her. You sound like someone who's already accepted her ending. She met his gaze. I stopped believing in endings a long time ago. The satellite connection pinged. Upload 78%. Then static. The screen glitched. Connection lost. Miller cursed. Signal jammed. Someone found the frequency. Impossible, Cole said. We bounced through. Not enough, Miller snapped. They're here. A low rumble shook the hangar, rotor blades cutting through the snowstorm. Searchlights sliced across the windows. Contact, Mason shouted. Evelyn grabbed her rifle. Move the laptop, get it to cover. Bullets shattered the glass as the door blew inward. Tactical shadows flooded the hangar, Black Ops units, no insignia. Cole ducked behind a fuel drum, firing short bursts. Miller covered the laptop, returning fire through the smoke. Mason moved like he was born for this, methodical, precise. Evelyn advanced toward the door, firing in controlled rhythm. The cold burned her lungs, but her mind was clear, too clear. A flashbang detonated near the entrance. The world went white. When her vision cleared, she saw a figure through the haze, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing night gear. Colonel Armitage. He wasn't supposed to be here, but there he was, moving through the chaos as if it belonged to him. He pointed toward her. Alive, he shouted to his men. I want her alive. She ducked behind a support beam, heart hammering. Mason slid beside her. Options. None, she said. We buy time for the upload. He checked his mag. Then let's make every second count. The firefight stretched into minutes that felt like hours. Smoke filled the air. Sparks from ricochets lit the walls. Miller yelled over the noise. 92%. Armitage moved closer, calm amid the gunfire. You think anyone cares about your files, Grant? He called out. The world's built on secrets. You just trade mine for someone else. She stepped from cover long enough to fire a burst that forced his men back. You built this on corpses, Colonel, including Mercer. Armitage's face hardened. He volunteered. No, she said coldly. You convinced him he was saving lives. A bullet tore through the laptop's casing. Sparks exploded, screen flickering. Signal's dying, Miller shouted. We're losing it. Evelyn ran to him, blood streaking down her arm. Back it up, portable drive, now. He ejected the chip, slamming it into a smaller device. Got it. Then move. They sprinted toward the back exit, snow swirling in through shattered windows. Armitage's men followed, but Mason stayed behind, laying suppressive fire. Go, he yelled. Mason. He shook his head. You need a head start. She hesitated, eyes locking with his, one soldier to another. Then she turned and ran. They burst through the rear door into a storm that felt alive, freezing wind, whiteout visibility. Cole led the way toward the fuel depot where their backup plane waited. Behind them, the hangar exploded, a roar of flame swallowing the night. Mason, Cole shouted. Evelyn didn't look back. She couldn't. Keep moving, she ordered. They reached the plane, engines half frozen, snow caked on the wings. Miller jumped into the co-pilot seat while Cole powered up the systems. Armitage's convoy appeared through the storm, headlights cutting through the white void. Come on, Miller muttered. The engine sputtered, then roared. Evelyn climbed aboard last, firing a final burst toward the advancing silhouettes before slamming the ramp shut. The plane lurched forward, sliding across the ice, tires barely gripping. Gunfire rang out, punching holes through the fuselage. Then lift. The storm swallowed them whole. Inside, the cabin shook violently. Evelyn braced against the wall, catching her breath. Cole's voice came through the comms. We're hit, losing pressure. Miller struggled with the controls. We can't climb. We've got to drop altitude and find cover. Evelyn grabbed the drive from her pocket. It was warm from her grip. How much uploaded before the signal cut? 94%, Miller said. Then the world's already seen enough. She opened the rear hatch slightly, wind screaming in. Evelyn, Cole shouted, "What are you doing?" She looked back at them, making sure they can't erase what's left. She hurled the drive into the storm. It vanished into the darkness, swallowed by snow and cloud. Somewhere she knew it would land, maybe on a glacier, maybe in the ocean, maybe in someone's hands, but it would be out there. That was enough. Yeah. An hour later, the plane limped through the storm toward the Scandinavian coastline. Systems flickered. Miller slumped back, bleeding from a graze across his side. You realize we're officially ghosts now. Evelyn gave a tired smile. Been one for years. Cole glanced back from the cockpit. If the files went out, what happens next? Chaos, she said simply. Investigations, denials, maybe a few resignations, but more than that, questions, the kind they can't silence. He frowned, and us. She looked out the window, dawn breaking pale and red over the endless white below. We disappear. Maybe that's the price of telling the truth. Miller grinned faintly. Could be worse. How? Cole asked. He glanced at Evelyn. Could have been cowards. Yeah. Hours later, they sat down near a frozen lake, engines dead, fuel gone. The world outside was pure stillness, the kind that hums after chaos. They built a small fire from scrap, the flames tiny against the cold. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Cole broke the silence. You think anyone will believe it, everything we found? Evelyn poked the fire with a piece of metal, eyes distant. Truth doesn't need believers, Cole. It just needs to be seen. He nodded slowly. Miller winced as he leaned back. So what now, boss? She looked up at the horizon, the sun finally climbing through the mist. Now, she said softly, now we wait for the world to decide what kind of soldiers it wants, the kind that obey or the kind that remember. The fire crackled between them, sparks rising into the pale morning sky. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt still, not safe, not redeemed, but real. She reached into her pocket, touching the empty space where the pin used to be. Somewhere out there, that drive was falling through the clouds, carrying the voices of the forgotten. Luke Mercer's last words echoed in her mind. You're not the one who gets left behind, Evie. Maybe he was right. Maybe none of them were. Why did silence feel louder when the world finally started listening? Because sometimes the echo of truth is noisier than gunfire. Yeah. 3 weeks after the drop. A cabin tucked in the Norwegian pines, snow burying its roof until it looked like part of the mountain. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and survival. Evelyn sat near the small stove, wrapped in an old blanket, radio static hissing beside her. Every channel told a different version of the same story. Leaked documents alleging human experimentation within U.S. military black projects. Calls for investigation into a classified program known as Operation Iron Dusk. Pentagon denies all involvement. Colonel Nathan Armitage remains unavailable for comment. She turned the volume down. Cole burst through the door, cheeks red from the cold, snow clinging to his boots. It's everywhere, he said, breathless. Major outlets picked it up. People are protesting outside bases back home. They're calling it the Mercy Leak. Miller looked up from the table where he'd been cleaning his sidearm. Mercy. Cole nodded. Because of Mercer's videos, the part where he says, they're using Mercy to build monsters. Evelyn's chest tightened. The world knew his name now. Maybe that was enough. Mason entered last, carrying a sat phone. We've got a problem. Evelyn stood. What kind? Armitage isn't hiding anymore. Mason placed the phone on the table and hit play on a recorded broadcast. An act of betrayal, Armitage's voice said, crisp, deliberate. These so-called whistleblowers have endangered global security. The data they released was falsified. One of them, former Major Evelyn Grant, is wanted for treason and for the deaths of U.S. personnel in an unauthorized explosion. Cole's face paled. He's turning the world against you. Evelyn stared at the radio flame reflection dancing in her eyes. He's turning the world away from him. That's how power survives. They spent the next days moving deeper into the wilderness. Drones began sweeping the airspace. Helicopters passed overhead at night, lights slicing through the mist. No communications, no contact, only the waiting. Miller was the first to say what they were all thinking. If he paints us as traitors long enough, the truth dies the same way we do in custody. Evelyn said quietly, then we need to find a place where his voice can't reach. Cole frowned. Where that? She looked toward the mountains, inside the people who still remember what honor feels like. 2 nights later, a knock at the cabin door. They froze. Mason aimed his rifle. The knock repeated, a pattern rhythmic. 3 short, 2 long. A code. Miller exhaled, lowering his weapon. Friendlies. He opened the door. A woman in civilian winter gear stepped in, shaking off snow. Major Grant, she asked softly. Evelyn nodded warily. Name, Dr. Corinne Shaw, journalist with the Ledger. You sent me a message through your proxy 6 years ago about veterans' trauma studies. You said you'd follow up when it mattered. Evelyn blinked, and you actually kept it. Shaw smiled faintly. Journalists don't forget promises that sound like confessions. She dropped her bag on the table and pulled out a satellite modem. You should know, the files you leaked are verified. Independent labs confirmed the implants, the neural schematics, all real. But command's spinning it hard. They're calling it counterintelligence fabrication. Cole scowled, even with proof. Shaw met his gaze. Truth doesn't win by existing, kid. It wins when enough people can't look away. They spent the night telling her everything. The valley, the mine, Mercer, the data. Shaw listened without interrupting, her recorder running quietly. When they finished, she said, if I publish this, every intelligence agency on Earth will be hunting you. They'll say you doctored the evidence, that you're unstable. Evelyn looked her straight in the eyes. Then write it anyway, because unstable truth is still truth. Morning came gray and cold. The mountains were silent but for the faint hum of distant aircraft. Miller was outside chopping firewood when the snow around his boots began to tremble. Engines. He dropped the axe and ran inside. We've been pinged. Mason grabbed his rifle. How? Shaw's face went pale. I transmitted last night, encrypted but maybe not enough. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. How long? Minutes. Then we move. They packed fast, grabbing weapons, rations, the last of their fuel. The noise grew louder. Helicopters, more than one. Cole's voice cracked. There's nowhere to go. Yes, there is, Evelyn said. Down. Behind the cabin, a narrow ravine cut through the forest, a frozen riverbed leading into the cliffs. They scrambled through it, boots crunching on ice. The roar of rotors echoed above. Snow exploded beside them as gunfire ripped through the trees. Contact, Mason shouted. They slid down the slope, taking cover behind rocks. Evelyn returned fire, steady, precise, but the sky was full of machines. Miller grabbed Shaw's arm, pulling her behind cover. You wanted a story, you got one. She shouted back over the chaos. Then give me an ending worth writing. They reached a frozen cave at the ravine's base, deep enough to vanish into shadow. Evelyn checked ammo. Low. We can't stay here long. Miller set up his scope near the entrance. 2 choppers circling, ground team closing in. Mason's breathing was ragged. They'll pin us. Evelyn looked at Cole. You still remember that uplink frequency from the training yard? He nodded. Yeah. Good, you're going to send one last message. He frowned. To who? She handed him Shaw's sat modem. To everyone. Yeah. While the others held the entrance, Evelyn sat beside Cole, dictating words that would outlive them. This is Major Evelyn Grant, Special Forces. 6 years ago, we buried the truth under the word classified. We told ourselves it was for safety, for loyalty. But loyalty without conscience isn't duty, it's decay. If you hear this, don't remember my name. Remember theirs. The ones who didn't come home because silence was easier than mercy. She paused, eyes closing for a heartbeat. Send it. Cole hit transmit. The light blinked. The signal went out, bouncing between civilian satellites, the same way Mercer's last recordings once had. Then the power cut. The cave fell silent. Yeah. Outside, spotlights slashed across the snow, voices shouted, footsteps crunched closer. Mason whispered, "We're surrounded." Evelyn's voice was calm. "Hold until the message clears." Bullets ricocheted off the rocks, the air filled with smoke and snow. Cole ducked low, clutching the modem. Transmission complete. Evelyn looked at him, then at the rest of the team. That's it. Miller smiled grimly. Then we've already won. Yeah. A grenade burst near the entrance. The shockwave threw them backward. Evelyn's ears rang, everything blurred. Through the haze she saw Armitage again, stepping into the cave mouth, flanked by soldiers. "Enough," he shouted. "It's over, Grant." She rose slowly, bleeding from a cut above her brow. "You said that 6 years ago, too." He leveled his pistol. "You think you changed anything. You just made martyrs out of ghosts." Evelyn's voice was soft but unshaken. "Maybe that's what it takes to remind the living." For a moment they just stared at each other, predator and prey, though neither sure which was which anymore. Then a sound broke through the standoff, faint at first, then louder. Radio chatter, dozens of frequencies overlapping, civilian, military, news networks. Armitage froze. "What is that?" Miller grinned. "That's the sound of your silence dying." The transmissions filled the cave. Grant's live message, spreading through open channels. Public demanding inquiry. Files verified. Armitage's hand trembled. Evelyn whispered, "You lost control, Colonel." He fired. The bullet hit the wall behind her. Mason tackled him, the two struggling in the snow. The soldiers hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks as new orders crackled over their radios: retreat, hold, stand down. Chaos. Evelyn moved toward Armitage as he fell back against the ice, pistol knocked away. "You built Iron Dusk to erase humanity," she said quietly. "But you forgot we're built to remember." His breath came shallow, eyes darting. "You can't stop what's coming." She crouched beside him. "I don't need to, I just need them to see it." Yeah. Minutes later the soldiers withdrew. The helicopters lifted, leaving only silence and snow. Miller slumped against the cave wall, exhausted. "You think the world heard it?" Evelyn looked toward the sky, dawn beginning to break through gray clouds. "They heard enough to start asking." Cole sat beside her, shivering. "What happens to us now?" She smiled faintly. "We disappear again, not as ghosts this time, as witnesses." Shaw turned off her recorder. "You just changed the story of every soldier who ever thought silence was loyalty." Evelyn's eyes softened. "No, I just reminded them that loyalty means nothing without a soul behind it." Yeah. As the sun rose higher, the snow around the cave began to glitter, millions of tiny mirrors reflecting the light. Evelyn stared at them, lost in thought. Maybe that was what truth looked like when it finally escaped, fragile, countless, impossible to hide again. Why did peace feel heavier than war? Because peace carries the weight of what it costs to earn it. Yeah. 6 months later. The world had changed, not loudly, not suddenly, but like ice cracking beneath still water. You couldn't see it until the break reached your feet. Operation Iron Dusk was no longer a rumor. The files Evelyn's team leaked had spread through every network, every feed, every whisper. The Pentagon denied, then delayed, then deflected. But the footage, Mercer's recordings, Armitage's voice, the faces of forgotten soldiers had already branded itself into public memory. There were hearings, investigations, half-truths dressed as transparency. And through it all, Evelyn Grant remained a ghost. Some said she died in Norway. Others claimed she was in hiding under a new name. Conspiracy forums made her a symbol, a myth, the soldier who spoke. But in a quiet coastal town in northern Portugal, a woman named Eva Hart tended a small boat she never took far from shore. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes still watched everything. And every morning, before the sun rose, she walked to the edge of the pier and whispered a name to the wind. Luke Mercer. Yeah. That morning, the sea was gray and cold. She watched gulls circle above the waves as she sipped coffee from a chipped mug. Miller's voice broke the stillness. "You're up early again." She turned. He was older, slower, but alive. He limped slightly, an old injury that refused to heal. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "You never do." He held up a newspaper. "You made the front page again. They're reopening the hearings. New evidence surfaced." Her brow furrowed. "From where?" He smiled faintly. Apparently, a certain journalist with the Ledger received a parcel postmarked from Reykjavik, contained an encrypted drive. She stared at him. "The one I threw into the storm." He nodded. "Looks like it washed up where it needed to." Evelyn's throat tightened, and the data. Untouched, Mercer's final log included. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Miller continued quietly. "Congress is calling for a public testimony. They want you to come forward." She looked out at the horizon, the same horizon she'd been hiding behind for half a year. "I said what I needed to say. They're offering immunity." She smiled bitterly. "There's no immunity for ghosts, Miller." Yeah. Later that day, she sat alone in the small cottage they called Safe House. The walls were lined with maps, old radios, notebooks. On the table lay a laptop. A secure message blinked. U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee Testimony Invitation, Major Evelyn Grant. She hovered her hand over the keyboard. The cursor blinked, waiting. Her reflection in the screen looked tired, scarred, but human again. Mason's voice echoed in her mind, the last thing he said before disappearing into the hangar fire. "Make every second count." Maybe this was the last second that mattered. Yeah. 3 weeks later, Washington, D.C. Rain fell in sheets against the marble steps of the Capitol. Crowds gathered beyond the barriers, veterans, reporters, civilians holding signs. "Truth is not treason. Honor the fallen." Inside, the hearing room buzzed with controlled tension. Cameras lined the walls. Senators shuffled papers. When Evelyn entered, the room fell silent. She wore a dark suit, her medals absent. The scar along her temple caught the fluorescent light. She didn't need rank to command attention. The chairwoman spoke first. "Major Grant, thank you for appearing voluntarily." Evelyn's voice was steady. "You can drop the title. I stopped being a major the day I told the truth." A few quiet gasps, pens scratched against paper. The chairwoman nodded. "Then tell us again, for the record, why you did it." Evelyn looked at the senators, the cameras, the faces beyond the glare. "I did it because silence kills," she said simply. "Because men like Luke Mercer were turned into weapons under the banner of progress. Because the oath we swore wasn't to secrecy, it was to humanity." She paused. The air was thick enough to hold still. "I was trained to follow orders. But the first order any soldier learns is do no harm. Somewhere along the way, we started redefining harm as strategy." Her voice softened. "I don't regret disobeying. I regret not doing it sooner." Yeah. The questioning lasted hours. Some tried to corner her, to twist her words into doubt. Major, you destroyed classified facilities, correct? I destroyed prisons built under the illusion of research. Do you consider yourself a hero? No, heroes don't survive. They carry the weight for those who didn't. Would you do it again? She looked straight into the camera. Yes, and I hope someone braver than me will do it after. Yeah. When it ended, she walked outside into the rain. The crowd parted around her, silence replacing the chaos. A young man stepped forward, uniform pressed, eyes bright. Ma'am, he said, voice trembling. I just wanted to say my brother was in one of those trials. He didn't make it. You gave him his name back. Evelyn's chest ached. He gave it to himself. I just stopped letting them erase it. He saluted. She didn't return it. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder. Some gestures mean more than rank ever could. Yeah. That night, in a quiet hotel room overlooking the Potomac, Evelyn sat on the balcony watching lightning flash across the city skyline. Miller joined her, 2 glasses in hand. They're already spinning it, he said. Commands promising reforms, investigations, apologies. She gave a soft laugh. Apologies cost less than change. He raised his glass. To ghosts. She clinked it lightly. To the ones who stayed human. Yeah. Hours later, when Miller had gone to sleep, she turned on the news. The world was different now. Slowly, messily, but different. Congress had suspended several black projects. Public oversight committees were forming. For once, the word mercy wasn't being used as an experiment, but as a principle. Still, the headlines didn't comfort her. Change came too late for most. Her gaze drifted to the small photo on her nightstand, a faded image of her old squad. Mercer at the center, smiling that half-smile that used to annoy her during drills. She whispered, "You made it, Luke. You finally made them listen." Yeah. Weeks passed. Evelyn's testimony became part of the historical record. Schools debated it. Veterans quoted it. Politicians used it. But she never stayed for the noise. One morning she left her hotel room without telling anyone. No note, no destination, just disappeared. Some said she returned to the coast. Others claimed she went back to Afghanistan, to the valley where it all began. No one ever confirmed it. Yeah. 1 year later, on a quiet stretch of desert, a small memorial was unveiled, a stone etched with the names of soldiers lost in classified missions. Among them, Captain Luke Mercer, Major Evelyn Grant. No body beneath the stone, just dust, wind, and a small silver pin embedded at its base, worn, scratched, gleaming faintly in the sun. A group of new recruits stood in silence before it, their instructor speaking softly. "They say she wasn't trying to be a hero," he said. "She was trying to remind us what one looks like." One recruit raised her hand. "Sir, what was her last mission?" The instructor smiled faintly. She didn't have one, she was the mission. Yeah. Far from the desert, a fishing boat rocked gently on the waves. A woman with short hair and sun-worn skin guided it toward the horizon. She looked older now, freer. She dropped a small coin into the water, a coin engraved with a falcon above a blade. The same insignia that once marked her unit. The same symbol Armitage thought he owned. The tide carried it away. Evelyn watched it sink beneath the surface, the water closing like a secret finally allowed to rest.